Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored with Steve Taplin.
Welcome to Software Leaders Uncensored, where tech leaders drop the filter and just tell it like it is. I'm your host, Steve Taplin, a serial technology entrepreneur, a guy who's launched 30 companies, had 20 of those fail, but scaled 10 to success. And I turned that roller coaster of a ride into my book called Fail Hard, Win Big. And this is where I teach people how failure is a good thing in business. If you're not pushing yourself, if you're not taking more risk to grow, but you got to make sure failure is you use it as your biggest competitive advantage. I also talk about how custom software played a defining role in every win I've had. Now I'm the CEO of Sonatify Technology. We're a US-based custom engineering firm with resources in both Latin America and the US. And today I am joined by a fun guest. We're going to like this. Maria Colacurcio, which I hope I'm saying that right, Maria. Maria has been a business leader, worked at major brands like Microsoft and Starbucks. She's been a co-founder. She is now CEO of a company called Sindio. Maria, welcome.
Thank you so much.
Maria, if you would, give our listeners kind of a few-minute overview of the journey of your career and what's led you to your current role.
My goodness, my career is so nonlinear. It's probably the antithesis of how people think their career is going to go. If you think you're going to lock into some kind of field and then be on the trajectory or climb the corporate ladder, mine's been the opposite of that. So I actually got into tech in the strangest of ways. I was living in DC working in politics, of all things. And I met a woman at a dinner party, and I'm aging myself here, but this was sort of .com boom era. And she said, "You got to come to Silicon Valley. You got to come work in tech." And I said, "Why would I do that? I know nothing about technology." And she convinced me, and she was very, very enthusiastic, very magnetic. So she convinced me to come take an interview at her job, which was an Israeli-backed tech startup in the hardware software arena. So very technical. And somehow I ended up getting the job. And I just got completely enamored and obsessed with this idea of translating the business outcome and the business problem from a really technical solution. So I would spend hours in sort of the hardware room with these very, very technical Israeli-based engineers. And I just came to love this process of translation. And that's really where my career started. So from there, I followed the thread and worked for many startups, always in that role of sort of marketing, communications, product marketing, figuring out how to thread the needle between the deep technical capabilities of something and how you tell that story to the market, how you go find product market fit, how you figure out, okay, this is what the product can do, but what problem does that solve? And that led me to a series of startups you've never heard of, for good reason, probably. But when I made my way back to the Pacific Northwest, which is where I was born and raised, big Italian family, I ended up working at Microsoft, which most of us do. If you're in tech in the Pacific Northwest, you have to have either Microsoft or Amazon on your resume, and had the opportunity at that point to co-found Smartsheet, which was a big opportunity in retrospect, but in the moment, going back to that moment where I had this opportunity to, with two other folks, ultimately four of us co-founded it, the response from my dad was really telling. So if you think about immigrants and Italian Americans, my grandparents came over from Italy. My grandfather came over, stowed away on a boat, like came here with nothing and was a farmer. So a truck farmer where they had a farm that they brought fruits and vegetables to Pike Place Market to sell them. And so if you think about the way my parents really thought about raising us kids, it was all about get an education and go work for a really great company.
For your whole life, right?
For my whole life, it was always go to college, go work for a great company. Neither of my parents went to college. Us kids were sort of the first generation of our entire family to go to college. And so when I went to my dad and I said, I'm going to quit my job at Microsoft and I'm going to go co-found this company.
I'm sure he said, "Oh, sure, honey, go right ahead."
Oh my gosh. I had just hit the 6-figure salary and was at Microsoft, a brand that when he bragged to his poker buddies, they knew what it was and, so proud. And it was just this moment of, are you out of your mind? Like, what are you thinking? And I did it. And it, moral of the story, it turned out great. But I think it's just really telling in terms of how we think about startup culture now and how that's evolved in terms of the opportunity, the risk, what it means to really take that leap of faith and what it means to our friends and family when they look at us and think we're just absolutely nuts, because many times it is nuts. And so you have to have that sort of conviction of self that you want to take that leap. So Smartsheet, amazing ride there. And then I spent some time at Starbucks. Starbucks was really a personal project for me. I had just always admired the brand. I'm a huge coffee drinker. I admired Howard Schultz from a communication and leadership perspective, and just always wanted the opportunity to work in an enterprise after working so hard to build business to business software. The one gap I always saw was you had these startups, or even at Microsoft, selling software to businesses, but there was often a gap in understanding what does the business need. And so I just thought, what a great opportunity to be on the other side of this, to actually be in an enterprise in communications, working for this person I really admired. And that's honestly what led me to the opportunity for Syndio, because it was really a problem at Starbucks. And we were very progressive in being one of the first companies to announce our pay equity. And that was what led me to see this as a real problem, and then go found and discover the team at Sindio.
Now, and thank you for that overview. And you've had a fun journey, and our journeys it's scary how alike they are, you've been involved in a lot of ventures, a lot of startups, as I have. Now, somewhere along the lines of all these things you did, you have 7 children.
I do.
Which is amazing. Now, that is a lot to shuffle.
It is. And it's so wonderful and beautiful. I mean, it is, these kids are the biggest joy in my life. And to have the spread that I have 7, ages 4 to 18. I just launched my first one off to college, but it just continues to reinforce, I think, something that you talk a lot about. And this quote that I think I heard more in the fitness realm from somebody that was big on running was, "You're 18 failures away from a huge success." And I just think that's such a cool way to think about life. And it's such a cool way to think about the organism that is family as well. It's not always going to be perfect. It's not always going to be seamless. But the important thing that I think about as a parent with this big family is that everyone plays a role, and the organism is not complete. It's not evolving and growing without everyone being plugged in and doing something. And I think in a big family, everyone feels that very keenly, because if folks aren't pitching in and helping out, things break and they fall apart and the wheels fall off the bus. So I think in some strange way, we don't get the things smaller families get. Like, parents often ask me, well, like, what about one-on-one time with your kids? And I'm like, yeah, that's a luxury that doesn't happen often. But when it does, it's so valuable and so precious. And I think on the flip side, though, what you get is a group of folks that are all working together to make the organism thrive. And everyone knows that without their role, the thing would fall apart.
I'll tell you what, Maria, as I've been going through my journey, and some of the most successful, wealthy CEOs and entrepreneurs I met, I never respected the ones that didn't, that ignored their family, that their work was everything. They made tens, if not hundreds of millions of dollars. They had their private jets, but what they didn't have was the family relationship. A lot of them had kids. They were divorced many times. They didn't have much of a relationship. And I talk about in my book, you got to figure out what your definition of success is, because to me, it's not just having wealth and being the CEO or founder of a company. It's the whole thing. And family is a huge part of that.
It's so true. And you have to have your non-negotiables. Like, I have a big job. I have to have my non-negotiables. And one of those for me is family dinner. So we have family dinner, and that means that it's not always pretty. Sometimes, actually, my kids maybe would watch this someday. So I have to be honest. A lot of times it's just a big vat of pasta. It's like literally just a big pot of pasta, and it's on
you got a lot of people to feed.
Yeah, and we all scoop it out. But it's that, I mean, and to be honest, again, like, sometimes it's 12 minutes. But they all know that at 6:30 at night, depending on the night, depending on the activities and who's going to cheer and who's going to soccer, at least 3 nights a week, we are going to sit down as a family during the week and the weekends too. And we are going to have that 15 minutes where there's no devices and we're all looking each other in the eye and having conversation. And even if it's just 15 minutes, it is a grounding foundational moment that really starts to drive the sense of ritual. And I think in company culture, in families, like, one of the most important things is you have these rituals that really start to become over time the underpinning of what matters. And so if you ask any of my kids what matters to me, it's food and family and time together, that we're having conversation and we're talking. And it's because these 15 minutes, these 15, 20 minutes consistently over time, they start to add up and create this ritual that really gets embedded in the psyche of what does it mean to be a family.
That's phenomenal. Maria, I have to admit, it does piss me off when skinny, fit people like yourself say how much they like food. Now, I know you have a crazy fitness background and that's part of your hobbies, but, and half our listeners see our YouTube, the other half are on Spotify and Apple. But man, it makes me mad when skinny people say they like food.
You have food is fuel. You have to like food.
That,
It makes me mad when I hear women say that they're, just exhausted from dieting. It's like, if you want to go down the fitness track, like that's a whole nother track to go down. But like, I am such a believer in strength training and such a believer in lifting heavy weights and eating for fuel. And, I just hope that this has embedded itself in my children as well, thinking about nutrition and food as fuel and not as punishment or reward. It's what fuels us to do our best work.
I love it. Maria, talk about Syndio. Tell us what Syndio does. Talk more about your company.
Yeah, of course. So Sindio is an AI solution for the enterprise that has embedded recommendations for how to pay people. So it's all about, what do we pay? Pay is not just pay. Pay is actually the model of performance for your organization and for your culture. And what you pay people says so much about what you value. So what Syndio does is we pull from myriad data sources, and then we have comp expert agents that embed recommendations into the workflow of your recruiters, your people managers, your HRBPs. And we pull all those things into a very simple interface that recommend a precise pay for a new hire, point of promotion, someone who's transferring laterally, whatever those pay moments are. And the recommendation is really precise because it sits at the intersection of reducing waste. So making sure you're not paying more than you need to for the skills and experiences that candidate or employee has. And also taking into account things like market rates, competitive pricing, external to your company, what existing employees in the company make, pay equity. So taking all those things into account and applying your comp philosophy and giving that specific recommendation in that moment that really achieves what you're trying to achieve, which is get the best talent and send a signal to the organization that's going to drive performance.
Very interesting. Now, how did you land this role as CEO of Syndio?
So I've been in this role 7 years, and we started that long ago, and we started as a pay equity point solution. So when I was at Starbucks, kind of rewinding, I was on the hook to present the first pay equity announcement, and it was Howard Schultz's last annual meeting. And it was the first time we were presenting sort of our cents on the dollar gender pay gap. And it was 98 cents, if I remember correctly. And this was before companies were doing this. So it was really progressive on the part of Starbucks to be so transparent. And I went to the head of global employment law and I said, why isn't it dollar for dollar? Like, we need to make this a great announcement. 98 cents is not good enough. Like, how do we make it dollar for dollar? And he's kind of like, okay, comms person, like, take a seat. Let me explain to you how this works. You can't just make it dollar for dollar because you want it to be. And so he took me through, like, I'm an intensely curious person and I really wanted to learn, how does this work? And he took me through this whole process of, like, you send the data out to the law firm and it takes 6 months and they crunch it and then they send it back. And it's this crosstab report and it tells you to the penny what to pay people to get out of legal risk. And I said, we should start a company for this. This is ridiculous. Like, this is the perfect use case for a startup. And he said, that's not how that's not how this works. And I said, no, actually it is. So we started thinking about it, talking about it, doing like the butcher paper stuff, whiteboarding it out. And in doing that, we found this gentleman, Zev Eigen, that was working on the same problem. So we decided to join forces. So Rob and I both left Starbucks and joined Zev and created this company, Syndio, and did tremendous work garnering 350 enterprise customers that leveraged our solution for pay equity, which means it was an innovative technology approach to help companies identify where they had gaps, where they had statistically significant issues that were because of gender or race, and then helping them solve those issues. And so that just led us in the direction, from the perspective of listening to your customer, from the perspective of hearing our customers say, okay, this is great, but we're still playing whack. Even with your innovative software, we're still doing this twice a year, looking backwards, whacking the mole of problems that pop up. How do we get upstream? How do we solve these problems before they start? And really, that comes at point of hire. It comes at moments of promotion. Any pay change is an opportunity to prevent new pay equity issues from cropping up. So about 3 years ago, we started developing a recruiter-facing solution called Payfinder. And then with this amazing AI transformation, it just enabled us to accelerate that even faster and pull in even more data sources like job descriptions, leveling, looking at how is that role over leveled, under leveled? Is it aligned to the job description? Helping companies draft the job descriptions. It just became so much more streamlined in terms of what we could offer. And so that's the move that we made to evolve into our space.
Excellent. Well, talk about some current and fun, innovative projects you guys are working on.
So we ingest data from all sorts of areas, from your ATS offers, your HRIS, your job descriptions, your comp philosophies, all of these different systems. But what really makes our solution special are these comp specific agents. And when you think about comp specific agents, these are the agents that are going out and providing insights around leveling, for example. So in the moment, to be able to use all of that data, analyze it in a split second, and identify you're about to mislevel this role. So I'm a recruiter, I'm opening a rec for a new role, I'm within my HRIS system, and I can see the level hasn't been validated. So I go out to Cindy and I validate the role, and I realize I was about to open this role at a level 6 and it's actually a 5. That is a huge, huge issue in terms of cost waste. When you think about that's about 15% over the course of the entire year of the employee. But if that employee stays beyond just a year, it compounds. So if you think about that, it's a huge opportunity to reduce waste for companies. And so thinking about those comp specific agents that do things like leveling, that dive deep into the workflow and look at job descriptions and validating the content of the job. Look at things like internal rates of hire, competitive market pricing, bringing in the survey data that's lagging, but also with some of the real-time ATS vendors, and providing a market rate point for the company that's really going to help them drive where they should be paying and why. I mean, it's a huge opportunity to get really smart.
So educate me on your industry niche. So 5, 10 years ago, companies were just kind of doing studies once or twice a year to get this data. And now companies like yours are delivering it real time. Am I getting that right?
Yes, those are two things we ingest. So you're right. So right now, how companies set market pricing is with lagging surveys, which is like the Aon Radfords, the McLaughlins, Mercer. They provide a really important part of industry because their end sizes are so big. So they have sort of 6-month lagging, but survey data to drive what's market. What are people paying? And then now you have newer solutions that are pulling just give to get from offers. So offers that are actually being made. So that's like a real-time pulse on what you should be paying in terms of competitive. So think about those two things. But now we're pulling in also the information for your company. So what do you pay? And then we're also pulling in your pay equity data. So that's a really unique piece of what we offer is looking at, we've been in this pay equity business for years. And what that means is we know why companies pay what they pay. And so bringing in that policy data is a really critical piece of this. And you pull all of that information together and you can now make really precise recommendations about what to offer folks, looking at both things, competitive to market, but also internally what's fair.
Awesome. Well, so as a tech leader here, what are some of the biggest challenges you're facing now?
Yeah, I think one thing that we've decided to really embrace as it relates to the pace and acceleration of what's happening in AI, we call it build out loud. And what that means is not being afraid to be really progressive and on the cutting edge of embracing what the LLMs are doing and what we could be thinking about that's 6 months ahead of what they're doing. So if you think about modalities like voice, you think about a bunch of things that are happening in memory, you think about there's the chat interface, but there's also a ton of things happening on the UX side. So how can we think about building out loud as it relates to prototyping, rapid prototyping, using our customers' data and getting new things in front of them all the time in a way that's very different from how you built in the SaaS world. I think in the SaaS world, it was sort of you wanted to vet things, you wanted to verify, you wanted to have a product roadmap that was very sort of locked for 6 months. You wanted to make sure that you had your features and functions all mapped out. That is very much not how we're building now. So it's this notion of building out loud that I think, again, back to sort of your thesis, you have to be really open to embrace failure. You have to be really open to things sort of falling on their face and being like, okay, well, what did we learn from that one? That prototype didn't work. Here's why. And how are we going to tweak it or move forward or learn from that? And I think it's a really important principle that companies have to get comfortable.
I definitely agree. And certainly the advancements in AI have changed the game of the ability to create prototypes quickly, where it used to take 3, 12 plus months and hundreds of thousands, if not millions, for your initial prototype. Now that could be done in weeks, which the game has definitely changed. I'd love to, we were talking about this earlier, Maria. You believe there's a missing ingredient on the trust of AI. And you had referenced how 90% of workers try AI tools, but 75% abandon them mid-task. Talk about your opinion on that.
Yeah, I think trust is a huge, huge adoption barrier that we have to address. So there was research that just came out a couple of weeks ago, and they were showing this. They were showing that 3/4 of workers in the enterprises they surveyed were using AI, but abandoning it, as you said. And then they also interviewed executives who were saying they were still very skeptical of the accuracy of outcomes. So I think what this means is that for organizations and enterprises, you have to go with solutions and vendors that you trust and that have trusted relationships in their past. And I think that's where Syndio is really positioned well, because we've been in the pay equity space dealing with very sensitive information and outcomes, looking at something that had to stand up against legal risk and be very, very accurate. I think accuracy is a huge, huge part of this. So I think in order to get over this adoption hurdle, leaders really have to consider, number one, is this a trusted vendor? Can I trust them with my information? Are they going to produce results that are accurate? Are they going to look at things like, obviously, you have to go through the InfoSec and the GDPR and the data privacy. That's all really important. But you also have to look at some of these ideas about how are you interacting with the actual users, and are you presenting information in a way that they are going to trust you? They're going to trust that it's accurate, that it's presented in a way that gains that trust so that you get over that adoption hurdle. And I think it's things like batching is really important. If you want to get in the weeds, you can't have a system like ours that's presenting recommendations give two different answers to the same question. So how do you address that when you're thinking about design? Because that is just an opportunity to erode trust. So every single interaction, you have to be thinking about, how does this either build trust or erode trust?
So what do you think from a future transformation of HR roles? What do you think AI can realistically do or not do?
Yeah, I think right now, it's changing every day. So you look at a company like IBM, who announced a few weeks ago that they're eliminating a ton of these HR VP roles, but the work is just shifting to the people managers. And so I think there's this element of work is changing in terms of where it's landing in the org chart. So there's a bunch of the administration type tasks or the data analyzing tasks that are obviously being automated by AI. But what AI is also enabling is this complete rework of people strategy and of org charts. And org charts are really being dismantled. And what's replacing them is this sort of work organization. It's how is work organized now? How is the organization compressing? Maybe you don't need as many people in this layer or that layer, but the work is what's shifting. And so I think that's what organizations like mine, anyone that's building AI solutions, has to be really smart and stay on top of, where's the work going? Which work is being automated? And of that work and the direction of that work, where's the direction moving to? So if you think about a compensation leader in charge of a group of agents or a group of humans, where's the work moving to and which work is moving? So it's really about mapping out the work structure versus the old way that we were thinking about it, which was sort of hierarchical org structure. Does that make sense?
It does. And I agree with you that I wouldn't say that AI is eliminating jobs. It's shifting the roles. It's changing. And of all aspects, whether you're in HR, whether you're a people manager, whether you're a software engineer, It's changing the game. You basically have two choices. You get on the bandwagon or you lose out, because I don't think there's any other options.
Yeah, I don't think there are either. I think it's really important that we provide the opportunities to our teams to upskill and reskill and start to learn how to use these solutions. And I know there's a bunch of initiatives happening across multiple companies to do that. And I know this is very top of mind for our customers. They want to figure out, like, how do I get my people trained, certified? How do I get them using the tools in the right way? And the bit of advice that I always think about that I was given, and I think it was actually on a call where someone was interviewing the founder of Claude, and he was saying, you've got to be thinking 6 months ahead of where the LLMs are at. And I took that to heart because I think that's true both from a productivity and upskilling of our teams, but also how we're building our products. Because when you look at that erosion of trust, going back to the trust perspective, companies don't want to look at your software and say, okay, I'm going to implement this software, and a month later, someone else is going to come along and they're going to have features that you haven't kept up to the up pace with. And so
Right.
you're lacking those features and now you're going to be usurped. Like, and that happened in sort of wave one of AI. You had all these sort of sales enablement tools and all kinds of different tools. And, within a 6 month or 2 quarter time frame, those things were available within the LLMs themselves. So I think folks in my position really have to be thinking about, how do you differentiate? What's your moat? And where's the expertise that you're building in that is really solving an outcome for your customers? You're solving a problem. If you're building tech for the sake of tech or AI for the sake of AI, you will fail. You have got to be building problem solutions. So solutions to problems that customers want.
I agree. Now, Maria, you've had an extraordinarily impressive career. You've touched a lot of different angles in the startup world, in the corporate world. What are some brutal lessons you've learned along the way?
Oh my goodness. It's funny because I am a communicator. I grew up in communications, so I should have known this one, but I think I've learned it over and over again that the words you choose are very important. And you have to be really mindful about word choice and how you present things as you're driving a company forward, because people, particularly, I mean, you know this, as the CEO, people take what you say very literally. So if you say something like, we're going to be fully transparent, one of our values is transparency. Early on in Sindio's journey, we said one of our values was transparency. And ultimately, we had to change that to candor. Like we talked about a candor trust loop. Like, we want to be direct and candid. But what happened is, when you say transparency is a value, and then you go through a tough time, like right when COVID hit and we had to do a small layoff, for example, people were upset because they were like, you didn't share with everyone that we were going to have to downsize, yet you say one of our values is transparency. There's tension there. And so I think
Yep.
what I took to heart was, you have to be really mindful about the words you choose. You have to be really mindful about the things that you're setting out as part of your culture, because that's what's going to drive behavior and performance in your company. So even something as simple as, we want to be transparent versus we want to be candid and direct, those are very different things with very different implications.
Great point. Before the show, you were talking about when you stepped away from the work with the birth of your twins, and reattempting it, returning back was a little more challenging, and how you tackled that. Talk about that if you would.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. So when I talked at the beginning about, this was just such a nonlinear journey, one of the decisions I made, I had the twins. They were, my oldest was 16 months when I had the baby girl twins, and I was at Smartsheet at the time. And it was probably 6 months in, maybe 8 months into the twins, when I was like, I gotta take a pause. And so I stepped out of the workforce, ended up being for about 6 years. And what a gift. I mean, I just look back at what a privilege that was, to be able to have the choice to spend that kind of quality time with my kids. And I always was very flippant, I think, in my mind, very, very naive about my ability to get back in to the workforce. Because when I did decide to get back into the workforce, it was very difficult. And I wasn't able to get back in at the level I left. I had to really take 4 or 5 steps down and then kind of claw my way back up. And I think it was a good learning for me, just in terms of thinking about looking at folks in the workforce, looking at their experience, and really being clear with companies, which is part of what we do now at Syndio, and in ingesting these comp philosophies. Why do you pay what you pay? Is it for years of experiences? Is it for skills? Is it for particular sets of expertise? Is it for organizational mastery? Is it for people management? Because some of the things that are really missed when folks are hiring is, they look at a gap on a resume and they're like, well, you're out of the loop. You're old news. But when companies can really be clear and define why they pay what they pay, it just levels the playing field a little bit for companies to have access to talent that might be sitting right under their nose.
Love it. Maria, thank you so much for getting uncensored with us today. You've just had an amazing journey and you have a great philosophy, a great attitude towards leadership, a great approach to tackling problems. Before we wrap, what's some no BS advice you want to give out there for tech leaders trying to build, scale, or even just survive in these interesting times?
I think my no BS advice would be, let's all be really honest about what our solutions can do. Because the more hype and smoke and mirrors that get put out there, the more the expectations are going to crash from the customers on the other side. And that hurts everybody in the industry. So again, build out loud and be open to the failures that may come, the rapid prototyping, but be really honest about what your solutions can do, because that's going to help all of us in the end, and it's going to help the industry.
Maria, thank you so much. That's it for this episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. I'm Steve Taplin. If you enjoyed the show, go ahead and hit subscribe. If you didn't enjoy it, well, I'm going to collaborate with Maria and we're going to make sure your pay equity is bad. And then we're going to tell your competitors about it. Remember to fail hard, win big, and always build what matters. See you next time.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. Another great episode of Software Leaders Uncensored. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really appreciate it. It's a lot of fun doing this show. I love talking with great tech leaders. As a side note, if you're interested, check out my new book, Fail Hard, Win Big. This is the story of how I built 30 companies, failed on 20, and turned 10 into multi-million-dollar wins. The common thread with all of them was custom software. Also, if you need software development help out there, my company, Sonatify Technology, we deliver world-class software development engineers out of Latin America. We have a solid track record of helping companies launch better products and faster. Thanks again for listening. Appreciate it and appreciate you.